years. We actually, Paul and I heard the news. We'd been taken prisoner of war June 1942 at Tobruk, and the first mail we had was in November 1942, and a whole batch of my mom's letters. I recognised the Basildon Bond stationery and her handwriting, and from Paul's fiancée, and we just opened the letters, and Mom was saying, "Oh, poor Margaret, what will she do?" You know, it was...
Because they were in a haphazard order.
Yes,
But, yeah.
and eventually we realised, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, Guy was captain of the Surf Lifesavers. I thought that he'd swum ashore. I didn't realise afterwards. The ship called 5 days after that, and my dad, who was a judge in Durban, applied his legal mind and interviewed the captain, and there was no drinking when they were at sea at war. There was no drinking. Guy knew that he would be seeing our parents in 5 days' time. He was then going back to Scotland. He would have seen his wife and daughter and had his own squadron. So there was some thought that a medic said he'd complained of colic and he might have felt ill and gone to the side. You know, the rail's fairly thin. And so we never knew. And this, in my dreams for about 20 years, he would come and he said, "Oh, I've had amnesia, but that's all right, I'm back." I just couldn't believe.
And actually the bit about the prisoner of war camp is actually also in Brokey's Way, and I thought, we didn't plan this, but you've read bits from other people. Perhaps you could read a bit that you wrote, and that might be an apposite appropriate thing, the bit about when you got the news, if you could find it.
We opened the letters eagerly, not bothering to put them into chronological order. No, it was pretty much what I said. We soon realized that something was amiss. We anxiously read out to each other such lines as everyone. Today, more than 70 years later, 74, I can easily recapture that awful moment. To me, Guy had seemed invincible. I never thought that he might die, although I knew about his letters to our parents were passed on to us. I knew about all these battles, but I didn't think it would happen to him. I was reluctant to accept that Guy was dead. He was a champion swimmer. Perhaps he had swum and then reached the shore. And now, eventually, I think with this, I've let Guy go. It really has been a closure. It's taken me a long time. What else were we going to say?
We've almost oh yes, the Dick Phillips bit on page 78 at the top about Guy's popularity, because this is something that anybody might be forgiven for thinking, like, oh, this is his brother. Of course he's making a hero out of his big brother. But actually, when you read the other people's writing about Guy, he clearly was a hero.
The loss of Brock, they called him, one can as yet scarcely realize it has happened. It is the severest blow that the squadron has suffered since its formation in November. For quite his position as Deputy Führer, I don't know why they called him that, of the squadron, and his irreplaceable qualities as a pilot, on whose prowess the reputation of the squadron has been built up, he was perhaps the most universally popular man we have ever met. Brock, as a pilot, will never be forgotten, but he will be missed most as one of the boys. And then my dad had a letter, Dear Judge Brokenshaw, from the Admiral. We are all terribly distressed about the loss of your son. And he says, we don't know what happened, and summarizes that. I had a long talk with your son about 5 p.m. on the 10th, the day before, discussing an exercise in which he had just taken part. He was in the very best of spirits, looking forward to going ashore next day when his squadron was going to carry out some intensive training. His loss is a very real one to the ship and his squadron, as he was quite one of my best pilots. I can assure you there was no question that he was in any way unhappy or suffering from strain. He was always the most cheerful and the best of messmates. I'd just like to bring you up to date on Margaret. He married Margaret Robertson in December 1940, and then Guy died August 1942. 10 years later, Margaret married Robin Sinclair, had a very happy second marriage. He died in 1995, and Margaret is still alive. She's 97, but still drives around Thurso, where she lives. And
I've met her, she's wonderful.
she's been very encouraging on my writing this. She's now, Robin Sinclair was the son of Sir Archibald Sinclair, who in World War II was Air Minister. Churchill wanted a reliable Lib Dem, which Sir Archibald was, and after his service he was made Viscount Thurso. So Margaret, although she doesn't parade it, she's Viscountess Thurso now, living her life. And I'm sorry I've given up international travel. I used to go over every year and see them. I'm still really close to the whole family.
That's probably...
Okay.
I think it's probably time. Can I read 3 lines quickly?
Of
Which
course.
is, it's just Guy's style, which you did mention, but this is a brilliant example of his kind of laconic playing everything down. It says, quite a number of other crews have been picked up by destroyers through falling into the sea for different reasons, mostly due to musketry being fired at them in anger. So, you know, I mean, his Guy's own letters are a substantial part of this.
Yes.
Although, I mean, there's a lot of description of the Norwegian campaign,
Yes.
but the letters make it so lively.
And he says at one point that he and Skeet, who was wounded, and Lucy was his commander, who was actually killed. He said the 3 of them decided they're not going to leave any notes just in case. They had just assumed that they are invincible. And Guy was the only one who really, well, Phillips too, survived.
So do you want to, shall we throw it open for,
Yes.
I'm used to there
You-
being
can I
somebody
just say-
here who...
Can I just say one
Yes.
thing?
You can say
You've
anything.
been such a good audience. You've been listening and not watching. And I was very nervous beforehand. I mean, now I spent my life lecturing at university, but I'm quite unaccustomed to it, and you made it easy for me. So.
Thank you.